Muchas gracias por haberse conectado y por su interés en este webinario y por
My
acompañarnos
name is
hoy.
Melody Serrano Luna. I'm a project manager in El Colaborativo, and I start in Spanish to let you know that there is a simultaneous interpretation. Please go to the little globe icon that you see in the low bar and select the language in which you want to hear the whole presentation. The interpretation will be ready throughout the whole event. So part of the things that you will hear today will be interpreted, so please choose your language.
Entonces, por favor, elijan la interpretación. And for English speakers, the same. We have two speakers who will do their intervention in Spanish. So please make sure that you choose the English language option below in the little message bubble that Zoom has to indicate that you need to click there to choose a language. Choose English so that we make sure that when the speaker speaks in Spanish, you will listen to the interpretation and not to their voices directly. So after this, thank you very much again for joining us. I have a teeny tiny presentation and we will introduce also our wonderful speakers for today. Today we are speaking about localization to improve early childhood development and child protection services, specifically in Guatemala. We will cover today why we are doing this, what the collaborative is doing, who the speakers are, and then we will have a discussion with them. Finally, any questions that you have to the speakers, you can ask them with the Q&A function, and we will collect your questions and answer them at the end. So we want to hear from you, of course. Please make your comments or questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box. And as I said, we will answer them at the end. We welcome feedback too. So this webinar is part of the Breakthrough Series Collaborative on promoting early childhood development and child protection for young children, so children age 0 to 6 in the Northern Triangle or Northern Central America. It is funded generously by the Venom Family Foundation's Global Education Fund, which aims at achieving equity in education through supporting community-based organizations and co-creating knowledge and fostering dialogues between organizations doing innovative action in early childhood development. Our objective with this project was to learn from community-based organizations in Guatemala. Why Guatemala? Guatemala has a neglected internal displacement crisis. Some areas of the country have a concentration of people returned from Mexico, from the US, who need services of families with young children, and we focused on these organizations. These are community-based, they are located in underserved, rural, majority indigenous areas in the Western Highlands or in the capital city, in Guatemala City, and they serve internally displaced Guatemalans or returned Guatemalans, families, and their children. They implement holistic services, what is usually called a two-generation approach. So they provide livelihood, sexual and reproductive health, and other types of services for the caregivers, but also services for the children. And they are also involved in awareness raising, education, or advocacy activities. So they are also trying to achieve systemic change, not only providing services, but also improving the life quality and justice for all. I did a review, of course, that we will publish at some point, and you will be able to see. I also did more than or almost 35 interviews with INGOs, the government of Guatemala, NGOs, and of course, community-based organizations. Thank you very much, everyone who spoke with me. Muchas gracias por su tiempo y por darme sus invaluables conocimientos sobre el desarrollo infantil and child protection in Guatemala for migrant and displaced Guatemalan families. We identified a mountain of needs, but this webinar specifically responds to the need of localizing funding streams and localizing funding and support from INGOs and from donors, international donors, more generally. So what we are doing now is, again, trying to learn from community-based organizations on what works well and how donors and international organizations and cooperation agencies can better support them. Now I will present the wonderful speakers that we have for today. I present them in the order that they will appear. So we have Nancy from Jóvenes por el Cambio, JXC. That is an organization trying to empower children and youth and women in the Western Highlands of Guatemala. They do this through sports projects, educational projects, sexual and reproductive health projects against gender-based violence, and they have done a great job in using sports to empower girls that I am sure Nancy Rolero Perez will speak about this later. We also have wonderful organization Coincidir. Coincidir, it has a national presence, it does advocacy on the national level, but it also provides services for children and youth who are excluded or are at risk, at heightened risk of violence. They are a multidisciplinary team, they are committed to gender equity, and also creates knowledge and research on human rights violations against children and youth, and how to transform this reality. They will be presenting in Spanish, as I said. They will tell us more about their work in Guatemala. And then we will have Nikki Enelsen, who is a Foreign Service Officer at the U.S. Agency for International Development, USA. She leads the Children, Youth, and Families team and the Indigenous Peoples Program, and is the acting deputy director for the Inclusive Development Hub. She has previously served in Guatemala, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and the West African regional missions. We also have wonderful donor, Global Fund for Children. We have Marta Sikai and Corey Oser from Global Fund for Children. Corey heads the grant making and capacity building programs at the Global Fund for Children and leads effort to empower and support youth-oriented organizations all over the world. And Marta is the program coordinator on the Americas team, and she supports the network of civil society organizations in Guatemala that make part of the Recarga initiative, so the Educational Recovery in Central America initiative. Marta is a Maya Cachiquel woman, so she knows the culture very well and she understands the region perfectly. So she brings that to this conversation. And Corey, as I said, has the grant making program, so she will tell us more about Global Fund for Children's work and their recommendations to other donors. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for listening to my intro. And we will start with the questions to Saul and Nancy. So please make sure you have interpretation for this part.
All right, Saul and Nancy, like I mentioned before, you do a wonderful work to combining the direct production of services for children, youth, adolescents, and their caretakers with the advocate efforts and the willingness to improve systemic change in Guatemala. So you have worked directly with the communities and you have analyzed the work that you do. I wanted to know what effective solutions have community organizations developed on the ground to respond the needs of young Guatemalan displaced children and that have been displaced or brought back so they can stay in their communities and they can benefit from social justice. Thank you very much in advance.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Nancy Pérez.
I'm coordinator of Jóvenes, JXC. Since 2015, we have been creating different intervention community activities. We have 3 axes of work: human development, environment, and climate change with indigenous people. And we also have our refuge, migration, and displacement axis. Within these actions that we have done since 2015, one of the effective solutions in the communities is the community diagnosis, to listen to the communities that they have different contexts, even within San Marcos and the west of the country, and to have these strategies of community protection in the community where that allows us to create this space. They also allows us to get integrated in that spaces and to help in a wholesome way, because we do all this work in the community and the community tells us their context and their lives and they can intervene in this context. That's very important, and we do it from the knowledge from the children, the youth, the caretakers, community leaders, and families. The approach has been very important, and we have been doing that since from sport. And we work specifically with sports for development with a focus in box. I'm a boxer trainer and I educate on sports, and that has allowed me to be in this type of space and share time with the participants. So we approach this area to integrate the community through the sport practice and recreation. We know that sometimes this area is overlooked in some communities, so we try to reinforce that area to beat young work, school drop-off, especially with population in risk, people that have mixed movements or belong to mixed movement that are at risk because of the region. And we have also been locating people without a nationality within Guatemala, and more people that are at risk of having. So we do that through boxing and sport. We have started our own methodologies to adapt them to development and globally. Social areas, technologic, and sport areas have been a great tool to intervene in the communities and provide this population an education, a space for education, because unfortunately, sometimes we have situations that are given in certain communities. For example, to say, yes, we reach the community, but the community says that we have also structural difficulties. So we also try to approach that area too. Also, to show the communities there is a different way to live, also respecting their culture, because Guatemala has a great diversity of culture, and we try to maintain this with all our activities. Sports have been a great tool for us and the communities to be able to reach the communities through box has been powerful, because here in Guatemala, boxing is not very well seen for women, and also in the rest of Latin America. This is a fight that shouldn't be for women, that is not for women, has been transformed. And this has allowed us to integrate ourselves with the community and populations. Also through auto-defense feminist practices. Sometimes it's a little difficult to mention the topic feminism, because in some place it's also a challenge that is real, but we have been working on that too. And also to intervene in the communities with the families, with children, youth, and families in general requires a lot of work together with the family as a whole. The training, the education, the updating of certain situations, sometimes when we work with communities, we forget that we're also working with moms, dads, siblings, sisters, brothers. So this is very important for us to have these strategies to intervene in the community, and it has proved to be efficient, good, and it has allowed us to provide an educational side of this, because we have been at schools and studies, so we are also involved in their education. Sometimes the educational system in the indigenous areas or the outskirts does not reach all people. So we are an organization that intervenes these spaces, and we try to give strength to the capacity and education of people in certain areas. And we believe and we know that there can be a true change through education. What we do in education in the communities too is, besides their protection, here in San Marcos, for example, in the west of the country, the rates are very high when we talk about irregular immigration. There is a lot of people on the move, especially more with the climate change, because of hunger, malnutrition, because there is no school in the community, because there's not space to practice sport. There's not a safe space to have this sense of belonging that we don't have in youth currently. To be within a youth population has been important. We do a lot of peer activities. We look that all youth receive some type of training in leadership, so they can transmit this information to others, to their peers, because it's inspiring for everyone. See one female youth providing a webinar or a course for other of their own age is empowering. And the same thing with sports scholarships, create more spaces for more women. We have a campaign that is Women in More Spaces, not only for sports, but further beyond that, so they can educate themselves and train as trainers, as referees, or sport leaders. And also for it to be a space in which they can have some type of economy and livelihood. So that's what we have been doing with JXC, with communities. With indigenous communities, we have also been doing this approach from Mayan Cosmovision. Has been very important for us to be welcome in these communities. We have created community vegetable gardens, and it has been very important to bear in mind the Mayan cosmovision to the care of animals, of the land, of the plants. So this gives us a lot of good room to work with the communities. So despite we are a young collective that approach young people, and we work here in Guatemala and the whole of Latin America, youth are often undermined, and the programs that they create are undermined. So we create more and more activities and projects that includes them. And we are really motivated with this system change that this will bring about, and that will definitely transform the community. Thank you very much, Nancy.
Well, the same question for Saul.
Coincidir es una organización de base comunitaria
That works in 60 communities, both urban and rural communities, and in 2 apartments, Chimaltenango and Jalapa. These are communities where there's nobody else working because of violence rates in general, and also because of violence against children. And also rural areas where there are high rates of inequality and discrimination against girls. So Consider is an organization which has one of the main purposes is to provide real power to girls. In Guatemala, girls are insulted on the street, they are touched, they are abused, they are raped, but girls cannot fight for themselves on the street. So political public participation for girls is prohibited in Guatemala. The right to participation is one of the most conservated rights that we have. Here there's an activity. I'm showing you a photo album that we had. I think that I may share this. It is both in English, Spanish, and German. This is a bike manifestation that they did protesting against girls kidnapping there, and it has a great impact, and this promoted reforming an alert to notify and report girls abduction, and that's how they could have a Congress to pass a law. And this is something that we hadn't seen before from girls' participation before. First, I'd like to mention that Coincidir has 5 daily centers for girls, mainly for girls who have suffered violence. So we work daily with girls in their own communities. First, we work in their healing. Our girls are really hurt, they are traumatized. So first they need to heal. So that was our first learning, because we've learned that we as human beings, we don't heal the same way. Some of us need psychological care, which we also offer. Some others also need psychiatric attention, and maybe other people can heal with art or with sport activities. And it's really interesting that girls also say that they can heal when they fight for other girls. So we offer a set of healing strategies, and then we set a series of strategies for girls' participation and involvement as a group altogether. So some of the pictures I'm going to show you are what we do. I don't have enough time for all of them, but here we says Zancos, and here it says raising those who have always been below. So that's what they do. In markets, they go around in Zancos, and that's what an activity they do. Then also Coincidir works with popular working. It also means that to work with those underserved, with those margined, with the poorest one. And our aim is not to get to communities to let them know what they need to change, because it wouldn't make a great impact. But this is a process to raise awareness in communities, and we believe that popular education is based on the fact that each group, each community is able to understand their own situation, to get organized, and to transform that reality. So that's our key principle when it comes to popular education. And here you can see pictures of all the community-based work we do. And why community-based work? Because there you can see the absence of the state. There you can see the absence of public policies. There you can see the violations against children's rights. And we've noticed that that many organizations were working with abstract ideas, but our approach is global. It means that we go from the local point to a national level. We are also providing international approaches because, for example, right now we are working with a regional initiative with international organizations for children's rights, but basing it on the local work. It also works with a rights focus. This means that we work in two different ways. One is focusing on the needs, which means that we employ an assistance approach, and the other focus is to understand that there are certain guarantees. There are certain institutions who should comply with those rights. So Coincidir needs to strengthen those securities and those guarantees. And that's why we work both with education and health. We had a cooperation agreement, and we are providing a really successful and interesting approach to turn schools in protection places. And there we're working with ethical codes, protection approaches, and in schools. When it comes to health, we are working in differentiated care for children, mainly for the early childhood and for adolescents. We are really proud of the political involvement of our girls in this country. The Girls is the name of the organization, which is represented in these 60 communities with coordinators in each community. There are speakers, they are represented, and they have their own identity. Here, for example, the girls have been trained in political dialogue. You can see how they are providing their speeches towards deputies, and also with the US ambassador. You can see him there over there. There was a meeting at the Congress. So what we mean is that girls can raise their own voice. They can think with their own heads and what they feel with their own heart. So there are specific demands that they have as girls. So we want to assist them. So to understand that we are political cooperators for them. Yesterday, they had a meeting with a really high-level person from our country, but we wanted to assist them, but it is them who go and speak to them. We also work when it comes to research. For example, here there is a suitcase with money. We found there was 120 million in an ex-ministry, and he confessed that he had that money. So we conducted research to analyze children's involvement and how they affect children. So we want to assess how much money was formed in corruption and how much of that money could have been used to support children. So this is what our community work wants to understand. Also, on Coincidir, we have a creativity approach. Here we have a Timantenango by Way activity there, which is for an organization that was pulling down. And there we had a place that we were imitating, that we were a specific place, and we were at the media, and they could solve that place that was in destruction in a week. Also, we have different conversations with the girls to see how we can solve a solution at the social level, but from a creative approach. Last year, we had this backwards march where there were 150 girls. And families that for them, they have been moving backwards. We have never done a backwards march before, so it has a great impact, and you can see there the contributions from the girls. So Coincidir works on community organizations. So they want to strengthen community systems to protect girls. We believe that we need to get to the root, and that is the social idea, protecting girls. And what is being affected by? Well, it is being affected by migration and violence. There are certain communities where we cannot work right now because there are no more children. All children have been taken, because in the past we would say that they would say that with children it was better and it was easier to get asylum. So children were taken both voluntarily and involuntarily. And there are some places where schools are about to close because there are no more children. And we've also noticed that there is no relation, there's no connection between the people who are staying and those who are leaving. So there is no integration between them. So we're doing activities to have meetings with migrants in the US and with their families here, because we've noticed that that bond is affected, and that's when families are disintegrated, and then we have a list of different problems. Here you can see lots of community organizations. I mentioned political and public involvement of girls. Here you can see how they are raising their voices. They are begging for justice for themselves and for other girls. Their actions could also get to different sentences and convictions. Here, a pseudo priest was now convicted because he would sexually abuse of their children. So girls were part of making this real. And for this, lots of educational processes directly in communities. And we also have different centers in which girls can get there and work there permanently. And here we have a key point which comes with generation, because Coincidir works with girls from 5-year-old, and now we're starting to work with younger girls. But the idea is to have women fighting as women throughout their own life. But the problem is that girls cannot do so, because when they become adults, they can already fight as women. But it seems that this is a process that we need to start all over again, once and over again. So we start with little girls who are 5-year-old, and then we have adult women who open the space for them. Also, girls as protagonists are really important because they are the key actresses. You can see that they were working with the media over here. Now we are starting with a new activity with the community press, so that they can have journalism from the girls, so they can raise their voices in the media. Coincidir also got an award to recognizing and acknowledging their work with girls, which at the beginning was called, and the organization STARA acknowledged their work. And here you can see their cantera, which is the work that we do with girls from early ages. Here we have another activity. We went throughout 41 kilometers, and there was a kilometer for each girl that was dead at a specific center. I'm sorry, Saul, we only have 20 seconds left. Oh, to finish here, I would like to share with you how we can offer a wide range of alternatives for girls to express themselves in different art activities. Here you can see we also have community assistance, which for us, migration and violence against children, it should also be involved in community assistance. And here I close with this picture that these are our centers for daily attention and assistance. But our idea is to develop a model to show it to different donors. We have municipal donors that have working for us as well. So that will be all. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Saul and Nancy. We've understood that you're trying to provide services and work directly with girls, youth, and their families, and that they want to get a consistent change that impacts on our inequality system that we have in Guatemala, which as patriarchy systems and corruption. So I would like to ask you, to organizations as you, how do you think that international donors and different international organizations can better support these efforts? How they can support to help you with these activities? Maybe Nancy, if you want to go first, and then Saul. Yes. Based on our experience, we've been working with flexible funds since 2017. We still don't have the entity character, so we're limited because of that, and that's why we cannot work with other funds. So for us, it's been really important to identify a specific approach to have a better community assistance so they can get to know the reality in community so that they can provide the necessary resources to get involved in our communities. Also, flexibility has been really important for us because we've been working with flexible funds. And that's why we're working on this, and it's been really useful for us, also together with the funds that we've been working with. Also, risk management has been involved in these funds because it's also part of what we face on a daily basis. Because when we work in communities and when we mobilize and when we need to go to different places, well, for this we need risk management. This is something that we've been taking into account to be able to tell our donors and our donors that is something that should be also included in our work. Also, in terms of innovation, both for us and for our donors, this has been really important in our spaces. Being able to work with funds innovation and also innovation for the projects that we already have. This is also a need that we're facing. We are working with different flexible donors. They haven't showed many demands, but this has also been limiting for us as JXC because as we are not an entity, we cannot receive other funds and we cannot be in a different spaces. So here in Guatemala, it's been really hard for us to have a legal perspective of JXC, and it's been really hard for us to become an entity because of different political changes and because of the situations that we are living in our country. So there's a certain point that we cannot get it. And the thing is that we're also 7 hours away from the capital city, so it's difficult for us to get involved in those legal processes. And that's why what some funds cannot understand, that it's really difficult to become a legal entity. And that's what when they say, well, but if you don't have this document that we need to provide the funds, well, we cannot work with you. And also, as we are a really young group, because maybe we are not sold or we are not as experienced as other groups or other associations and organizations, that's a problem as well. So this has been really restricting for us in our work with donors. Also, specifically with the reports and all the requirements to have a specific fund, we also maybe we need to use a logo or a specific action that we are required. That is something that was some of the problems that we've been facing with our donors. So we don't have much experience with formal donors, but yes, with flexible funds who have believed in us. And it was thanks to those flexible funds here in Guatemala that we could be supported, because as my partner mentioned, here in Guatemala it's really difficult to get maybe the government support or maybe the town hall support. But these flexible donors have helped us a lot to be able to continue with our tasks and our job. And as we said, that they are not requiring that much from us to be a legal entity, but they just want to acknowledge our job as a community basis, and they acknowledge the impact of our job, because our job has been really transforming in different communities, and these are actions that we've been carrying out throughout the whole time. So These are part of the actions that we've been doing. And also the practicability that we had with these funds. So I couldn't be able to mention further about this because we are not as experienced, but we only have experience with these flexible funds because of the time we've been carrying out as a organization. Thank you very much, Nancy and Saul. Please briefly, if you would like to share your experience.
Yeah, Coincidir has experience working with big funds with the European Union and also other types of funds. The first thing that we think is that donors, and this we have been trying to focus on, is to bring the resources to the communities directly. Something that we have proposed since last year. Said also mentioned this. It's how much of the money that the donors give finally arrives in the communities. And there is an initiative of USAID that is mentioning community-based communities, and that is already a change. And something else is that our donors have been afraid, and this is understandable because of the corruption areas and the corruption area record that we have, and we are paying the price for that because the communities are transparent, that work properly. Well, we have to pay for what other people did here in our country. So we are trying to build this trust with them. We have been working with cooperation, and we don't see this as cooperation, but as a friendship, Summit Foundation, Friends of Children, and International Solidarity. And we see that those flexible funds are really helpful because they will be used in exactly what you need. And don't misunderstand this, because these organizations, before giving this fund, they also want to know you deeply, your capacities, your abilities, your economic performance. They realize that you're a transparent community, and then you become partners. When you are a partner, not just a person you collaborate with, they trust you. They trust that you're going to administer those funds with transparency. And what I see with cooperative and donors, sometimes they have so much of a complicated settings that only specialized and experienced people know. So this is a very much like an elite. Only certain people reach or understand this. And that's why we always go back to the same, to the more basic things. What do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? How are you going to measure that? All the indicators and rates. And another thing that we propose is, we don't propose, but there is like an hegemonic cooperation, and the North usually is the one that provides for the South. And we also like to highlight that Latin America has also been provided great support for the world. So the South is also able to provide support. So within all our pain and misery, we have a lot of learning and experience that we have. For example, the US with the gangs and crime, England with all the situation that they're having, but the North never looks to the South for examples. It's usually the other way around. So there should be a certain valoration of what we're building here. We're not talking about extractivism here. Don't misunderstand that, because sometimes we have here the methodologies that we have created with so much effort. They come back from abroad with a different name, and we are disaccredited. For example, here, people, how are they going to apply what they learn? But we do that in popular, normal education with practice, with better practice. We invented that here in Latin American, but now it has another name. It's no longer ours. It's part of different settings that someone around there invented. And the thing is that as people that have been working on this, we know that every donor have their own business, their own format, their own way to indicate what's an indicator. And basically what we have to do is adapt to that way of working. So we are not scared of being audited, for example, especially because we are transparent, but the conditions are discouraging. So, for example, there is some donors that say that if you want to post something, it has to be approved by them first. For example, so your words as an organization have to be corrected by the donors. So then we see, and this is the last thing, there are donors that should see what is it that they want. We have donors that want to promote social auditing. That is inherently political. But when we try to involucrate or bring the society into a more active role, they said, no, you cannot do that because that is a government area. But then I say, don't try to impose that on us because that is the government's role. And also there are some donors that understand us and they say, we just want to support you. And this impact and transformation work cannot be done overnight. We have donors that want to provide support 3 months. And even so, they are able to tell us what's the impact of what they are doing. And I mean, how are you able to say that you make an impact with 3 months when we have been working with generations with girls that since they are very little until now that they are women, independent and conscious about their right? That is something that has to be worked on in the long run. So when we receive something like that, we show this is what we work on. This is how we want to work on. And sometimes we have the good luck that we coincide with the donors. And that there is when we start building together. Thank you very much, Saul and Nancy. It's very important, everything that you said.
And for the person who asked what localization, what definition we are using the definition that Nancy and Saul described before. So we are against extractivism. We are for democratizing the relations between global North-based and global South-based organizations. For everyone's knowledge, we will write a guide about localization in knowledge creation by August. I will share it with everyone here, so everyone will be able to read it. So next, Nikki Enelsen. As I mentioned, she has a long track with USAID in several countries. And she was also a speaker at a previous event that you can see the link on the chat box here on Zoom, called Innovating Protection for Children at Risk in the Americas. During that event, she spoke about the Centro America Local Initiative and the actions by the US government and USA specifically to address the root causes of irregular migration from Guatemala. One of the points there was localization, because Centro America Local Initiative is about localizing some of USA's actions in Guatemala. And so what we would like to know now is what advances, challenges, or lessons learned has USA had in relation to localizing services in Guatemala, especially for, of course, young children, children in general, and the youth that are caregivers. And besides that, we would like to know about the future USAID localization projects in Guatemala. And okay, I leave you, Nikki.
Thank you very much, Mara. I could just stay and listen to Saul and Nancy talk a little bit more, though. That was really interesting. Thank you for sharing your opinions and experiences working in Guatemala, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'll try and answer most of those questions, if not all. I was just listening to it and trying to decide if I had them all worked in or not. So thanks again for welcoming me here. I'm Nikki Enerson. And please do tell me to slow down if I'm speaking too quickly for the interpreter. I will be speaking in English, and the Spanglish sometimes, gets complicated in these forums. So I am a Foreign Service officer. I'm currently Deputy Director of our Inclusive Development Hub, like she said, based in DC. So I lead our teams that work with our USAID missions, or that work in our embassies in about 100 countries, working for and with children, youth, and families, and to promote the rights of Indigenous peoples. All of those issues are so important when we're talking about Guatemala in this forum, right? I just wanted to mention that I am based in DC right now, and so this is based on my experience in Guatemala, but I'm speaking for the Children, Youth, and Families team in DC and not for the USAID mission in Guatemala, because we have a full staff there. And I think we can start. Today, I will be discussing USAID's support to Guatemalan communities, to youth, children, and families related to the implementation of these 3 strategies and policies. Now, you might notice that the one on the left is Youth and Development Policy. And I just want to mention that whenever we talk about children, whenever we talk about early childhood development, we also are talking about youth. We're talking about young people being parents, being members of families, and being children themselves. In USAID, we define youth as between the age ranges of 10 and 29. So obviously we're talking about kids, students, parents, brothers, sisters, siblings, and I heard Nancy talking about what happens with families, right? If we're working with kids, what happens to the families and vice versa, and how it overlaps. Before I dive into a short description of the application of these policies, so it's the Youth and Development Policy, what we call the Thrive Strategy, the Advancing Protection and Care for Children in Adversity, and a brand new, being launched in the next couple of weeks, mental health position paper on USAID. But before I just dive into the description of these policies in Guatemala, I'd first like to just touch a little bit on USAID's localization approach. So all of our work in Guatemala is guided by local actors and with local systems, and we're trying to do more of that. A main focus is also addressing the root causes of migration. Both localization and the root causes strategy are available online if you all want to Google it and to learn more about that. In other words, USAID is looking to partner with local organizations, the government of Guatemala, local government, Indigenous leaders, traditional authorities, youth, children, parents, to reduce the need and the desire to leave Guatemala. Saul, that story you talked about with there not being children left in some areas, that's heartbreaking, right? Like, oh, that touched me. Essentially, USAID is working to partner to build the Sueño Chapin at home, right? So we're looking at the American dream and balancing it with what is the Sueño Chapin, or the Sueños. Between 2021 and 2023, USAID provided more than $140 million to nearly 30 local organizations and enterprises to drive change in Guatemala, just in 2 years, just to talk about how we're shifting, how we're partnering. The goal for the work in Guatemala and USAID in Guatemala is to work to connect Guatemalans to opportunities that enable them to achieve prosperous, secure, and dignified lives at home in Guatemala. Our focus populations are Indigenous peoples, women, and youth. To achieve this goal, obviously, we have to partner with the government of Guatemala, communities, and Guatemalan initiatives. So I want to say a couple of times that, of course, there's not a single narrative to describe the motivations which lead to the decision to migrate. However, there are some commonalities between many migrants. Not all, of course. There's no single profile. There's no single motivation. Everybody is different. I want to say that a few times. We understand that. But the biggest characteristic is age. Young people are more likely to be chosen and to choose to migrate from Guatemala. We know that a lot of young people are entrusted by their families and communities because of their potential. They're young leaders. They're known to be hardworking, ambitious, dedicated to improving their communities. However, sometimes they're also fleeing unsafe environments, especially in urban areas. Violence is both a push factor and a deterrent, both talking about gender-based violence, violence against children, and violence in the community. It happens at home to push people. It happens along the way. It happens in the US. Violence is something that's important the whole way. And while there are more men than women who migrate, We know that investing in women represents a key opportunity to break the cycle of dangerous migration. 60% of remittances from the United States are received by women. Currently, the majority of these remittances are directed towards consumption, daily needs. Our work at USAID and remittances has shown us that by increasing financial literacy, helping women, families, young people to save, to build capital and assets, to invest in smart businesses, we can have a tremendous impact on reducing intentions to migrate and the need to migrate and to build a more stable life back home. This, of course, makes a big difference for early childhood development for children and families, right? How we're investing the money that's coming from the US back to Guatemala. And finally, as Saul mentioned earlier, more children are migrating, more in the past decade than in previous years, and that's a trend that continues. So I'm going to talk a little bit about USAID's approach to youth and development, the first of those 3 policies that I wanted to talk about. Our approach is centered on the positive youth development framework. We consider the age ranges of the youth participants of the programs we're working in, think of their specific needs, what's happening, social development, emotional development, physical development, cognitive development, what's happening in their brains and bodies, and what are the opportunities based on the stages of life that they're in. For example, it's obvious that if we're working with a 13-year-old girl in an urban area in Guatemala, her needs and opportunities are different from, example, a 27-year-old Indigenous man working who's in the Altiplano. We need to think about who we're targeting. And so that's the first aspect of youth and development. We recognize that youth are not a monolithic group, but that youth are very diverse and we all have intersecting identities. Therefore, we know that intersectionality is important to our youth programming. Our vision here, which you can see on the bottom of the screen, is of a world in which young people have the agency, rights, influence, and opportunities to pursue their life goals and contribute to the development of their communities. These are the 3 objectives, and I'll talk a little bit about them. The first, objective 1, is on access, that USAID programs are instructed to consider how they can build access to services, information, and opportunities. The second one is on participation. And Saul, you gave some great examples of youth participation, the participation of girls in USAID is supporting youth to participate in their communities and supporting system change to better serve youth. And that leads me to the third, which is on systems. We want to see that youth have a stronger collective voice in and are better served by local and national systems through more coordinated and effective services, practices, and policies, embodying the principles of positive youth development. This means that we're trying to increase the capacity of stakeholders to convene and facilitate around youth issues. We pay attention to norms and culture. We're looking at policies and laws, resource flows, and identifying local mechanisms and local leaders. Okay, and I'd like to show just a short video on a new project that we just launched in Guatemala, which is called Jóvenes con Propósito. We also call it the Central America Service Corps, which is a good example of how USAID is advancing youth participation in their communities in Guatemala. So thank you for sharing that, Mara.
Le preguntamos a varios jóvenes cuál es su propósito en la vida y estos respondieron:
ser un líder para mi comunidad,
apoyar a mi familia,
hacer la diferencia en mi comunidad,
inspirar a más jóvenes,
ayudar a las comunidades más necesitadas,
ser el cambio positivo en mi familia.
¿Y si les decimos que ahora hay una iniciativa donde podrán lograrlo?
¿Cómo así?
Jóvenes con Propósito, una iniciativa de servicio voluntario juvenil del Gobierno de Guatemala y el Gobierno de los Estados Unidos, que promueve el desarrollo positivo de las y los jóvenes, mejorando su sentido de pertenencia, resiliencia y capacidad de hacer contribuciones significativas a sus comunidades, a través de resultados claves. Mejores oportunidades para jóvenes en Guatemala, alianzas con organizaciones locales, construcción de una iniciativa sólida, sostenible y basada en evidencia para que pueda continuar como un legado por décadas. Jóvenes con Propósito.
Estoy listo. Estoy listo.
Estoy lista.
Estoy lista.
Estamos listos.
I just want to tell you of a couple more results related to improving access to services for youth in Central America before I turn to our Thrive strategy. So the first one is on access. We're focusing on improving access to services, opportunities, and raising incomes for parents, for young people, for Guatemalans. Last year, for example, there were 220,000 primary secondary school students who participated in USAID programs aiming at improving math and reading skills and helping them to graduate from high schools in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. This one is across Central America. Other programs are extended to children and youth who are out of school as well. Since 2021, for example, about 30,000 young people from high migration areas have completed USAID-supported vocational training programs that reflect local labor market needs. So we make sure that the training matches where there are opportunities. In that same time period, more than 12,000 young people have become employed in new jobs after completing the training. I'll give the example of Irma, who is pictured here. Irma is from Momostenango. She left school, she was pulled out of school in 6th grade to support her family. After a few years outside of school, she was able to resume her studies, working with USAID's Puentes project. She began what's called the Emprender con Éxito diploma, and then was able to enter into another training program to strengthen her office skills. It was computer skills and office skills using specific softwares. These courses helped her on her path to become a teacher for CONALFA, which is the National Literacy Committee of the Guatemala Ministry of Education. Now Irma is using the ICT, the computer skills, to strengthen her work in teaching a literacy class for Indigenous women in her community in Momostenango. So that's one example of programming with youth. Another result from last year as well is that we had worked with more than 63,000 farmers in both Guatemala and Honduras to bring in new innovative technologies, or bring them across from neighbors, from other communities, not necessarily from overseas, right? It could be from within Guatemala. With this, those 63,000 farmers were able to increase production and income, and USAID helped to facilitate access to more than $57 million in credit for these farmers. USAID has also focused on specific value chains in ag products. One example is coffee. In that same time period, USAID has assisted 10,000 farmers to grow and sell coffee, resulting in $90 million in sales. Alongside this, we help coffee farmers access $3.7 million in credit to grow their businesses. Finally, USAID support in 2023 helped these businesses create or sustain more than 70,000 jobs in coffee, helping thousands to build wealth for themselves and their families close to home in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. By creating jobs and placing youth and parents in them, we're helping Guatemalans to care for their children at home by increasing opportunities, skills, and income. Next slide, please. So we are taking steps as an agency to ensure that by 2030, 50% of USAID programming globally will place local communities in the lead to co-design projects and establish their own communities. This means finding ways to bring local voices to the center of USAID programming. And I'm loving this conversation, just listening to you all and all the ideas and amazing initiatives that you have. So therefore, when we are talking about issues and endeavors that are youth and child focused, this means putting child and youth-focused organizations in the driver's seat. It means hearing from young returned migrants. It means listening to children whose parents have migrated. It means meeting with traditional authorities in Indigenous communities. It means meeting with youth-led organizations and with youth-serving organizations. By 2023, we're proud to say that the majority of USAID programs in Central America have been co-created with local partners and communities. And by working together to incorporate local knowledge and perspectives into the design, planning, or implementation of activities, USAID programs are more inclusive and better aligned with local priorities with less risk of duplicating efforts. One example of this was that Jóvenes con Propósito activity, which was, we also call it the Central America Service Corps. That video that we just showed, that project was co-created with youth who are involved in as beneficiaries, as participants, and in managing that project going forward. I would just like also mention that, as Nancy said earlier, flexibility with funding is very critical, and USAID is constantly trying to get better at this, and we're complicated. I'll just say that, but we're working on trying to get better at having local organizations be able to access flexible funding, especially looking at youth-led organizations. Okay, so now I'm going to turn to our Thrive strategy. The strategy has formerly been known, or is currently known, as the USG strategy to advance the protection and care of children in adversity. So what do I mean when I say children in adversity? Who is that? Who are we talking about? We know that there's more than 2 billion children which can be classified as being in adversity globally. These are children who are experiencing conditions of serious deprivation and danger. Marginalized children who could include those who are living outside of family care, who have been trafficked, children who migrate or whose caregivers have migrated sometimes, those who experience violence, are affected by or emerging from armed conflict, humanitarian crises, or natural disasters, children with disabilities, and children who are otherwise vulnerable because of acute illness, having been born small or sick, or through disease and sicknesses such as HIV and AIDS. This is who we mean. These are some examples of children in adversity. So the US government, through the Thrive strategy, envisions a world in which all children thrive within protective, loving families, free from deprivation and danger. This is described in these three objectives, the 1, 2, 3 that you see on this screen of the Thrive strategy. We know that child development is a cornerstone for all development, and it is central to US development and diplomatic efforts. There's so much evidence to show, without a doubt, that a promising future belongs to those nations that invest wisely in their children, and that failure to do so undermines development gains for a country as well as for the child and the family. These three objectives of the Thrive strategy, and by the way, we're launching this strategy officially in a month, so this is a preview, is 1, building strong beginnings. So this is our focus on parenting and early childhood development. The second is called supporting families to thrive, which is looking at focusing on reducing child-family separation. And the last one is protecting children from violence. So I'm next going to talk about a project that is implementing the Thrive strategy in Guatemala. And I don't know if Kelly Bunkers is still on, but I saw you on here and she can help me answer any questions later if people have any on changing the way we care, because she works directly with this. It's an example of a project that implements all three objectives of this Thrive strategy that I just talked about. It is supporting the child protection system, looking at reducing the violence, the separation of children from families. So it's supporting the child protection system at the national level, including the SBSA as well as other actors. It looks at workforce strengthening and multi-sectoral coordination, while also emphasizing a bottom-up approach aimed at strengthening local understanding of factors that place children at risk of separation to increase safety and nurturing family care. At the subnational level, it has worked to strengthen the capacities of local authorities and communities to identify just which families are at risk of separation, referring them to appropriate services, looking at policies, and dedicating local resources in the community to help these vulnerable children and families. This has demonstrated to changing the way we care, but also to Guatemalan communities and government, that there's a solution at hand to support vulnerable children and families. Changing the way we care has created a package of family strengthening approaches and tools to support this effort, gathering evidence as they started in the eastern part of the country, and we're in the center and east, and then contextualizing the model to spread to different municipalities and different departments. And so now they're starting to work in the Altiplano as well, in areas highly impacted by migration and particularly for unaccompanied children. So just a couple of stats for changing the way we care. 1,000 children have already benefited from these services, including 100 kids who had been living in residential care facilities, orphanages, or other sorts of homes who've been brought back. Close to 3 million Guatemalans have learned now about the importance of family care through public social media awareness campaign. And 15 municipalities have established and funded psychosocial clinics. And I'm going to switch to the last mental health position paper, speaking of psychosocial clinics. So I just want to mention a couple of things, and this is also being launched within the next month. The figure on the left describes USAID's approach to mental health and psychosocial support, as discussed in this paper. We know that approximately 1 in 4 people globally live with a mental health condition. We also know there's a treatment gap as high as 90% in some countries, and there's an immense shortage of mental health professionals in Guatemala. This has had a detrimental effect on people, communities, nations, development projects, schools, so on and so forth. We know that well-being and mental adaptiveness translates into stronger and more resilient communities. This is relevant to migration, obviously. We know that the migration experience is often traumatizing, both for those who leave and migrate themselves and those who are left behind. It can result in the increased vulnerability of young people to physical and sexual assaults, And the separation from parents and caregivers leaves children more vulnerable to many things, including violence, but also including just your developmental well-being. So USAID projects are working to be more trauma-informed. The document on the right is a picture of a position paper which contains a discussion of trauma-informed programming and what it should contain. And so what do we mean by when I say trauma-informed? I'm sorry that this table is a little bit blurry over here, but you can see it online as well. A lot of the approaches that are or the principles, which is what the table on the slide has, a lot of these approaches are really similar to inclusive development approaches. When we say being trauma-informed, we mean efforts should be led by and listened. We should listen to local communities. We should not assume trauma, even in locations with high levels of crisis and conflict. Not everybody has the same levels of trauma, and we should never assume it of individuals. We need to ensure safety, both physical and emotional safety. We need to build relationships and trust within the projects that we're working on. And this takes extra time and resources, both the safety and the building relationships, and that needs to be budgeted into interventions for youth and young people and children. We need to engage people. We need to be led by those who are most impacted by the services that we're talking about. And we need to center on strengths and resources in individuals rather than deficits or problems. This is very similar to that positive youth development approach where we focus on strengthening assets and agency rather than looking at deficits. And finally, we need to recognize the role and differences, but due to culture, gender, history, and that there's differing individual experiences. And I think that's it. I think that's all the time I have. Sorry to go over a little bit, Mara. I'd be happy to answer any questions either here or afterwards. Feel free to share my email. And there's a bunch of resources that can be found online at usaid.gov. Thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Thank you very much, Nikki, for your extremely orderly presentation. So now Marta and Corey, last but not least, Global Fund for Children will help us understand and know more about their funding model and flexible funds. So my question to you is if you could please explain your funding model in Guatemala, especially the Recarga program, and how you provide flexible funding for community-based organizations based on their needs. And the other question that we have for you too is about recommendations on how donors can increase flexible funding and need-based funding for community-based organizations when it comes to early childhood development, early childhood education, and based on your experience in the Northern Triangle. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and it's such a pleasure to be here. I'll start by sharing very briefly a little bit about Global Fund for Children, and we'll then answer the question more specifically. So Global Fund for Children is a public foundation, which means we raise all the funds that we disperse. We have been around about 30 years, and we aim to support community-driven systems change and elevate young people as change makers. And we do this by working with community-based organizations, with flexible funding, with capacity development and organizational strengthening support, and also helping to foster and strengthen networks of organizations. And it's such an honor to share this space today with two organizations that Global Fund for Children has supported, Coincidir and Jóvenes por el Cambio. In terms of our approach, whether in Guatemala or other countries, a really key part of the approach is hiring staff from the countries and regions, like my colleague Marto, who'll be talking about some of the work in Guatemala more specifically. This really allows us to ensure that the connections are really grounded in the culturally appropriate context when we're building relationships with partners. The flexible funding is really a key that we've heard mentioned several times today, really a process to encourage organizations to identify their own priorities and not funding projects that are very short-term in nature, but really the opportunity for a more holistic investment over the longer term in organizations. We're also open to funding both registered and unregistered groups. I know Nancy talked about the the political context around registration in some cases. So that's important to us, that it doesn't preclude groups that are doing really important community grounded work from accessing funding. We also facilitate reflective networking spaces to foster regional learning. So both learning within a country like Guatemala or regional learning that crosses borders, because it's really see that as an important space for organizations to share with each other their methodologies and approaches, and just to have that common space to reflect. We also facilitate processes for organizations to reflect on their relationships with their community members and how they engage with communities, recognizing that in some cases there are power differentials between organizations and community members. So we offer kind of facilitated processes to reflect on those relationships. And in many cases, we offer kind of participatory grant-making approaches where decisions about what organizations to fund and criteria around those organizations are made by different types of community leaders in addition to our staff. So it's not only our team making those decisions, but people who are most directly affected by the work at hand. So with that, I'll turn it over to Marto for part 2 and a little bit more contextual grounding in Guatemala.
Thank you, Cory. As Cory was mentioned, Global Fund for Children supports local education civil society in Guatemala through our Recarga initiative. And Recarga means recovering the education in Central America. Specifically, we're working in Guatemala and Honduras. It is a donor collaborative effort, and we support a cohort of partner organizations to help them move out of isolation and getting to collective impact. We provide them flexible annual funding and offer supplemental and emergency grants as needed. It is important that we use flexible funding models because at the end of the day, it is an action that reflects our trust in local leadership. And we don't want to create extra work for organizations that already have limited resources, most notable time. So it is a trust-based process, and that at the core seeks to shift power imbalances. We have in Guatemala, we have been accompanying each partner's individual organizational capacity journey with mentoring support. This journey starts with offering each partner a facilitated participatory self-assessment, where they invite staff members, participants, community members to have a general framework of the organizations. And the challenges and feedback that emerge from these self-assessments led them to create individual organizational development plans. And that highlights like a wide range of next steps that they will want to address. Some of them would be like monitoring and evaluating processes, well-being workshops, safeguarding policies, etc. And each organization is encouraged to prioritize what they felt is more important to them to address with their valuable and limited time. And that is when we offer extra financial support to develop these development plans. So I think in general, it's important to support them by strengthening organizational practices to become more adaptive, creative, and resilient to make progress on their organization mission. Because at the end, they know better their communities, their daily needs, and how they want to address the challenges that they have. encounter in this journey, specifically in Guatemala.
And very briefly, any recommendations that you have for other international funders?
Sure, I'll start with that. And I think many of the things that I'll mention have been touched on. So I think the flexible funding, particularly multi-year investment, is really key. Also, additional support to help organizations strengthen their work, whether it's organizational structure or programmatic work in ways that makes sense to them, and also space to connect with other organizations to share learning around methodologies and approaches that can also enable more collective strategies. We also believe that it's important not to recommend particular methodologies or approaches, but really to first listen to organizations working with communities. We heard Nancy mention the community diagnosis, community listening process that their organization goes through. And we believe that it's very important to support organizations to facilitate these dialogues and processes, to be able to explore root causes of issues and understand the levers of power for making change rather than to promote specific methodologies. At the same time, when there's time invested in building trusted relationships with partners, there is then the space to be able to nudge them and perhaps encourage them to take different perspectives into account. But we believe ultimately our role as a funder is not to promote certain approaches or methodologies, but to have that role as a connector, a facilitator, and a convener. And with that, I'll turn it to Marta for some final comments on that question.
Thanks, Cory. Following on what Cory mentioned before, to weave and strengthening partners network in Guatemala, we open spaces for in-person convenings within the cohort. It would be at the national or regional level. And one of the examples that I can share is that we have recent an in-person convening for our Guatemala and Honduras partners, where the whole cohort decided what they would like to work on as part of like a regional agenda. In this convening, partners led more than half of the sessions in the gathering. They shared their experiences with social advocacy, new ideas for collaboration, and the challenges encountering in this corner. At the end, our partners propose having a well-being and restorative leadership workshop. And my point with this is like they told us that we have both created a trust relationship, and I know it takes time to build it, but they felt confident to share their thoughts and proposals openly. And for us, that was like a powerful feedback. And so this is like crucial that funders' approach is rooted in trust-based philanthropy practices. We do not understand the context and complexity of the community challenge, but local leaders do know better their communities. So if funders want to strengthening local leadership and communities, ask them what they need and support their agenda instead of just fulfilling funders' agenda. That's my contribution.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Cory and Marta. All of this was hugely helpful. So we went over the time. We started 5 minutes later, so we will finish a couple of minutes later too. And I wanted to remind you to please write your questions on the Q&A, because even if we cannot answer them now, we will be organizing future webinars. So your questions will be helpful to inform future activities, future webinars. And now I would like to make a little summary of what everyone said. All of your interventions were great. This is a very complex discussion, of course, localization, anything really, early childhood development, child protection, localization. Most of the topics that we work with are of a political nature. And so, of course, they are controversial. We are dealing with very complex issues. And so it is good for us to have these conversations and see different viewpoints. But basically, all of the points that speakers had in common were that we all agree that any activity, any action that we carry out in Guatemala needs to involve the principles of meaningful child participation, gender equity, and being anti-patriarchal, that is the system that creates gender inequality and injustice. It needs to be a two-generation approach, like everyone explained, so working with the youth, with the children, with the youth when they are in their roles of caregivers, when women are in their roles of caregivers, it is important to work with the whole community. And to be inclusive also in the sense of indigenous knowledge, local knowledge. I think we all agreed here that community-based organizations and local organizations are the ones that should inform programming and any project because of their constant contact with the needs of their communities. Like Nancy explained, also these organizations are better positioned to do the types of needs assessments, evaluation that we really need with the real needs of the community. And when it comes to funding, we understand, and I think we all agree that flexible funding, longer term funding, so multi-year funding, not a 3-month funding, is what we need to see systemic change and see sustainable change. And finally, we can see Global Fund for Children's pooled funds and collaborative efforts between different donors as a way to achieve flexible funding and funding that is based on the needs of organizations instead of an imposition from international agendas. So thank you very much, everyone. You can see on the chat that we have a list of resources on localization, on early childhood development, and on child protection, and as they pertain to children on the move or displaced children. So please check them out. And of course, we are very accessible. If anyone has any questions besides the ones that have already been answered on the Q&A, you can write to us. The email address will be here on the chat box, but it's also on the website that described this event and on the website that we will publish with the recording and with all of the information on the speakers and the summary of their main points. So thank you very much again for staying until now, and we will keep in touch. And thank you very much for all of your attention and your interest in this topic. And thank you, speakers.